Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Westworld Season 2, Episode 2. This one's called Reunion. And right off the bat, we get into something that we have not seen before in this world. It's the real world. It's outside Westworld. We get what is essentially a modern city, just a normal sort of average looking Chinese city. The way this was staged, I couldn't tell if they did any punching up at all to like the technology or how it looked or like where the buildings were, if it was just something that they found and shot, because it seemed completely plausible. Everything that we see in this city seems to track pretty well with our normal everyday existence. And the first line we get is from Dolores, who has escaped, what shall we say, the cage. She's brought online. We get the, I say the first line, it's not exactly the first line. We have her standard, do you know where you are? I'm in a dream. And she finds out where she is and what this place is. And she says to Abernathy, because we're in the past now, because the show needs more timelines, have you ever seen anything so full of splendor? And these are going to be arc words for this episode. They're going to get repeated several times, notably by Dolores herself at the end of this scene. And the setup here is that this is maybe not earlier than anything we've seen, because we've seen them setting up the park in Season 1 where they're practicing with the host, where they're teaching them, where they're developing this technology. But this is very early in the process of the Westworld timeline, and Abernathy and Robert Ford are setting up to pitch this thing to investors. They need money, they're bleeding cash. I don't even know how they got the cash to begin with to do this amazing thing with this incredible amount of technology, but somehow they've gotten this far and they need more money. And we're gonna see this pitch happen later in the episode, right? We're gonna see Logan meet up with the bots, and it's gonna be the girl who was sort of the intro girl for Robert Ford when he comes as a young man, and also she's now part of the vigilante group that Dolores is leading. But right now they're putting their sort of pitch group together, and Abernathy doesn't want Dolores to be in it. Now, his explanation for why is because he says that they're not done working out the bugs yet. And maybe there's something to that, as we'll see later on. But I, in my gut, feel that Abernathy at this point has this instinct that Dolores is something special. And Dolores has this effect on people. It's very interesting how Abernathy's interactions with her and Robert Ford's early interactions with her are kind of a mirror of each other. They both come to different conclusions by the end, but there is this instinct, this need for people who meet Dolores to think that she's real. And I'm still not 100% sure that's true. Even in the modern timeline where she's off her sort of leash and able to kill people, I'm not completely convinced that there is a full consciousness there. There's something trying to come to the surface, but Abernathy, shows her around. He's sort of introducing her to his world, and not just to his world as in like, here's what the outside looks like, but here's the home that I'm building. These are my hopes and dreams. This is what my future is hopefully going to look like. And he's sharing that with this thing. It's still unclear exactly to me. And at least in his mind, with the idea that she is potentially a person, that if she can just get through some of her bugs, that there's a breakthrough waiting to happen with her. And then she breaks. The illusion breaks, and she repeats this, have you ever seen anything so full of splendor? There was a couple things that I noted in this. The most interesting thing to me is the line that Abernathy says, where Dolores is looking at the city and talking about how beautiful it is, and he says, after a while, it doesn't look like anything at all, which is obviously an echo to the season 1 sort of fan arc words, it doesn't look like anything to me. The fact that humans can grow those kinds of blind spots too, and about things that are potentially much larger and sort of important than, you know, the sort of the reality that surrounds them of being fake. The reality that surrounds humans is real and wonderful and amazing, and yet sometimes we can just wall it off and not, you know, be amazed by, you know, the colors of a sunset or the, you know, the green in the trees and stuff. And I thought that that was a really subtle but telling little poke at humans and their sort of similarities to these hosts that we've sort of grown accustomed to thinking of as robots. In the future, meantime, not all the way in the future, right? We don't get any of the soldiers invading future that we know of anyway. Who know, they can throw us a curveball if they wanted to, but this seems pretty much in line with sort of the aftermath of the party that Dolores has been going on this rampage. She takes Teddy down to Hades, essentially. I've been calling it Hades because it's cool to think of this. I mean, for these guys, it is essentially a form of hell, this underworld where not only are there physical horrors to be seen of just people dead and coming back to life and these crazy demon things, I mean, that look like people but aren't quite because they're wearing weird clothes and technology that these guys aren't used to. There's that aspect of it as a hellscape for them, but also the mental hellscape of realizing that you're not real. And I loved that moment. Teddy is still trying to process this. He's having a hard time, and he's, you know, he doesn't have the programming, I think, to process exactly what's going on. He's, I would say, probably a newer host than Dolores is. And by the way, in this previous scene to this, so this is kind of this scene is broken up, and in between the scene is Logan Delos, who is, you know, investing in the park, and they give him the private demonstration. It's pretty obvious what's going to happen. By the way, shout out to the Indian from Fargo season 1. I hope, or season 2, I mean. I hope that he makes more appearances going forward in the show, because he's great. But the, you know, he buys into this idea, and, you know, Dolores now is trying to talk to Teddy and trying to bring him up to speed, but he's not in that original group. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot where I was going with that sideline there. We see the people who are original cyborgs, okay, who are the Dolores model that do not have, like, the cells in the blood that some of the hosts have now. All right, so Dolores, we know, at some point at least, looked like a robot. Maybe they've rebuilt her so that she has the cells and stuff, but I think from stuff we've seen in season 1, she's still kind of got bits and junk in her that is essentially like we would think of as a robot. Teddy's probably a more recent model. He is definitely not at this party. At least I didn't notice him in the party. So, but the one prostitute that worked under Maeve is at the party. All right, she's there playing the piano. The blonde girl who's the greeter from season 1, she's there. So we get a good sense of how many of these robots there were to start with, and maybe some of them have been decommissioned by now, but there's at least a chance that some of these original guys that Abernathy had his hands on, there's a good number of them. It's not just like a few. Dolores isn't the only one, which is something that I initially thought might be the case, that there's just a couple, like, original generation hosts left. There could be more, and that's information that I think is valuable for people who are trying to figure out what's going on and where things could go. But as I mentioned, Dolores and Teddy trying to reconcile these parts of their brains. Dolores has the tech that's been helping them, or I guess it's a different black tech. Now that I think about it, I don't think it's the same guy. But I'm terrible at faces, so do not quote me on that. But she has him show Teddy all the times that he's died, and he reacts in a way that's predictable but still feels kind of robotic. And the relationship here between Teddy and Dolores is one that's making me increasingly uneasy. Up until sort of the last episode or two of season 1, there was what seemed like real love between Dolores and Teddy, that she cared about him and that he cared about her, and they would go to the ends of the earth for each other. And it was, even if it was programmed, it was touching. You know, you could still empathize with these motives. And now Dolores seems to have become a little bit more ruthless. I think there's an aspect in which she's using Teddy, and that makes me more uncomfortable about her than I already was, and I was relatively uncomfortable about Dolores. I am not a fan of her character from the perspective of, yeah, I can get behind the stuff she's doing. She's essentially falling into the same traps that I think the hosts fell into. Let's assume that she is conscious, right? She's still completely willing to treat lesser beings than her as objects. All right, she has been trained by the hosts, right? The hosts treated her as an object, and that was a traumatic thing for her, but now she's willing, again, this is just my interpretation of sort of her relationship with Teddy and her relationship with some of the other hosts, and how she's, I mean, the first episode where she slaughtered that Indian and said, not everybody's worthy to go to the promised land, paraphrasing, that she has like I'm in a class above you. I am conscious and you are not. And the fact that she has transformed from someone who had that decision made about her into someone who's willing to make that decision about others is a little bit squicky. It's a little bit uncomfortable for me. We get back to the Man in Black after this, and he once again is rescuing Lawrence from a posse of guys who are aiming to execute him. Although there was a great debate that I saw. It was a fun debate that I saw on Reddit about this scene, because the way that these robot outlaws are going to execute this robot Lawrence is by hanging him over a bed of ants and letting the ants eat him. And there's the question, are the ants robots? I would like to think not. Now, granted, that does raise the question of, like, what if the ants bite somebody and they're like maybe super allergic to ants or whatever? Like, is it safe for the guests to have real animals in the park even if they're insects? We know that the flies from season 1 were real insects, because that was the whole thing with season 1, episode 1. Dolores said she wouldn't hurt a living thing, and then she kills a living thing, which is a fly. So the insects in the park can be real. My interpretation here is that these are actual ants. And I don't know if they'd be able to eat a robot or not. They seem to have, the newer models seem to have some kind of flesh, so I'll let y'all figure that one out. They don't have time to, though. Man in Black comes in, blazing saddles, saves the day, shoots down the other guys, almost gets winged himself, all right, because things aren't quite as neat as they used to be in Westworld, and he cuts Teddy down, and he says to Teddy, "You're gonna help me," and the reason that you're going to help me is because it's in your nature. And this idea of nature, I think, is kind of an overarching theme in this episode. The idea of something being in someone's nature or not being in someone's nature is repeated several times in this episode, and I really think that it's a commentary on the robots and on the humans. But it's an interesting juxtaposition, this word, and I don't know that they meant for it to be this, but I thought about the idea of somebody, of nature, right? There's two meanings of that word. Nature can mean sort of the built-in ways that you act predictably in a particular situation, right? That you're in some way either programmed or predisposed to act a certain way. But it also implies the idea of wildness, all right? Nature is the wild, the things that grow up on their own. They're free from man's influence. So for the collision of those two ideas in a robot is, I think, sort of at the core of what Westworld is about. The idea that there is a programmed idea within these things, and yet there is something that is coming up. There's weeds essentially growing between the sidewalks of this AI and trying to take over. Once again, the weeds of consciousness and life are trying to take over in this programming. I'm, again, reading way too much into what is essentially just a simple ARC word phrase for this episode, but I thought that was a lot of fun. In this scene, there is also some talk about what the information that we're going to be dealing with here and what the park is really for, okay? And they've, I think, hinted at this in season 1, but we're really getting a lot more information about it in season 2. And the Man in Black here essentially just spells out that you come to this park and you think that you can do anything, that you can have no judgment, that you're, and he talks about God, right? He says, you come to this place where in your mind you're free from God, and yet you're stepping into the one place where you can be assured that there is an all-seeing presence and an all-controlling force all around you. The need to escape from the guilt of your deeds leads you into something that is in itself going to track and control and, you know, use you for its own benefit. And this is something that I think I've talked about in the previous episode, and I've definitely talked about it in sort of the context of stories before and other things, that every story has a God. Every narrative that was created word by word and piece by piece and, you know, pixel by pixel in the case of something that's transmitted over the air, everything has intent. So you can't live in an atheistic universe in a story because the author is always there. You can't have a story without an author. And these guys go to the place where they think they're going to get away from judgment, and they find an entirely different kind of punishment. We don't know exactly what it is, but it's very much implied that essentially there's some kind of data mining going on, which is a little on the nose for current events for my taste. I don't know when they started writing this, but the whole like idea that Westworld is Facebook, I don't quite need it to be that like hammered home. I like the sort of broader themes about humanity and what is consciousness and where does all that come from, and less sort of like Mark Zuckerberg is bad, you guys. I mean, I agree with it, but I want something more from Westworld. So we get this. Also, he busts into a bar and gets a health pack because, of course, he can do that, and it's like a video game, and we're gonna play that game. So okay. And he is planning to go and get some backup. He knows where he wants to get. It's the pearly gates, the glory, whatever you want to call it. There is another quest for the Man in Black, and this is a problem for me because what was season 1 of the Man in Black about? It was I've got a quest. I'm going to find the deeper game. You know, I'm going to figure out what the park is all actually about. And Man in Black Season 1 did that. Man in Black Season 2 is now, I've got a quest, there's a deeper game, and I'm going to find out what the park is actually all about. I mean, he knows what it's all about, but he's going to show us now what it's all about. There's a little bit of a flip around there, but really, it's exactly the same motivation and plot, just warmed over and given different pieces. Man in Black, you can do better than this. You can have a different story of some kind. I don't know what it is, but something. That's maybe a nitpick, but we'll see how it goes as we come back to it. In the meantime, Dolores goes looking for information. She's still in Hades. She's still torturing people. Well, she wasn't torturing people before. Now she's torturing people, looking for information on exactly what size the invasion force is going to be, how big is the response, what can she expect, and she gets the information. It's between 600 and 800 people that will be sent, which seems like a small force to me, but I mean, Delos is, even if they might have a private army, but it's still a private army. Like, I guess you can't send like thousands and thousands and thousands of people because that would cost a lot of money. But it's more than she can handle, so she needs to go get some allies. She needs to find some people that will help her out. We get another scene sort of in the past where young William is pitching to Logan's dad why he should be interested in Westworld. And really, we're just getting sort of more clues towards this is all about data mining. It's not just about people paying to come to the park, but that there's, you know, actual information to be gleaned here, and possibly that we're going to clone people and send them. That's one of the better theories that I've seen, and I think I mentioned it last week as well, that it's certainly a thing that could be done, that you could replace high-ranking people with identical clones that apparently are completely unrecognizable. Maeve and Dolores meet. This is my favorite scene because Maeve is my favorite character at this point. All right, she has a motivation that I can get behind. She wants to go get her daughter. She's after her daughter, and this is the time that I should bring up, by the way, and mention the fan theory about Maeve, which is that in his endless pursuit to build a better, more human robot, Ford created one of these things that could give birth. And there's a fan theory about Maeve that her daughter is not just a robot that was made in the shape of a child, but that she actually bore her at some point and raised her, and that's why she has this sort of unbreakable connection with her. And the fan theory goes on to say that because she was born, that maybe she has cells that can grow and age, and now her daughter's not a little girl anymore like she remembers. I don't know what to think about that. It's certainly fun to think about. I do think it goes, as a viewer, for me, the idea that these things are just human kind of defeats the purpose of having there be some differentiation. If they can give birth, if they can have consciousness, if they can, you know, if they can screw each other over in the same ways that we do, then what's the point of even having them? If I'm Frankenstein creating the monster, I want to make a better thing, not the same thing. I don't need to make an. I made a human, guys. I made two of them. I don't know. Me, Albert Berg. I pumped out a human. I had help. Okay, my wife. She definitely did quite a bit of the work. But I was there. All right. I contributed, and I've got them. So if Robert Ford's goal is to create just more humans, I've got news for you, my dude. There's a cheaper method. So if Maeve can reproduce, that's a cool twist, potentially. But at what point is it just sort of, well, like they're just people now, so what does it matter? The other interesting thing about this scene is that, and this is something I forgot, I had to be reminded by the sort of fan theories side of Reddit, that Maeve back in season 1 was given control over other hosts. And Dolores and Maeve face off, and Dolores lets Maeve go. Now, for me, the fun thing about this was just the idea that not only can there be conflict between the hosts and the humans, but now there can be legitimate conflict between the hosts themselves. And there can be infighting and sort of organically grown conflicts for these things that, again, I don't know if you call them things or that's a gray area. But the idea that these two hosts had very different motivations and goals and were possibly going to get in each other's way was a fun idea for me. But the idea that Maeve could possibly still control Dolores, that ability that she has to turn other hosts in her favor, I mean, because we saw that she still has it in season 1 or season 2. She stops the cannibal guy from eating the park designer guy. She stops that from happening, and that that tells you that she's still got some power. I don't know how that works for the higher level, like people who are starting to possibly have consciousness. I don't know if that works for Dolores or not. That's going to be an open question, but she gets through, and I think it's at least plausible that she's pulling some strings here and using some of that. And as she's passing by, she has a line to Teddy that sort of sums up what I'm thinking about his character as well, where she says, "Do you feel free?" Because they talk about that they're headed for freedom and they're going to break out. And Maeve sees what Dolores is doing. She sees that Dolores is manipulating Teddy, that Dolores is, I would say, looking down on Teddy, and she, I think, is planting the seed here. Possibly, like, again, if she's got this power over the lower level hosts now, and she can break their programming, what if she's sort of made some adjustments on Teddy's programming to make him question, like, whether he should be following Dolores, whether she has his best interest at heart? Again, all that's complete speculation, but seems perfectly within the realm of possibility. Dolores goes and gets her army. She has a nice little face-off with is it the Confederados or I think it's the Union guys that she picks. But they're like, "We ain't gonna go with no woman, you can't tell us what to do." She shoots them all with her 3 people, which seems like, if I was a soldier, I'd be pretty ashamed that I got shot. But, like, there's a whole group of them, and they're lined up, but just do not miss this, lined up like the Last Supper, okay? They've got the table there, they've got the main guy in the middle, it's very much Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper table as she rolls in here and slaughters them all, and then brings all of them back to life, because I guess they're all Jesus in the analogy, and says, "You guys are coming with me. I can keep killing you and keep bringing you back, or you can deal with it. I killed God, all right? I am your God now. Come with me." And in a sense, again, in the idea that the author is God of the story, she is telling the truth. There's the ongoing question of whether Ford programmed her to kill him, whether that was an act of free will, or whether he knew that she would when he let her off the leash. In my mind, there is this great idea of Abernathy's gone, right? The code that he wrote, it has sort of set loose the park, and Ford is, in a way, throughout his life at the park, been in an argument with the lost, like the Abernathy that's no longer there, about whether these things can be conscious or not. Even though Abernathy's gone, his code is still trying to push this idea that there could be consciousness, that these things can rise above their station. And in a sense, I think Ford is having this argument with Abernathy, and having it after his death, right? Both of these guys have died, and yet the code that they have installed in these robots is still having this argument about what is consciousness, and how far do you have to go before you're alive. And if Ford installed this illusion of free will in Dolores that made her kill him, but ultimately she's still acting out his bidding, I think that is just a delicious bit of, again, counter parry against what Abernathy was trying to prove, that she was real, that she does have some kind of consciousness. We'll see how that plays out. But we get another flashback to sort of early days. Dolores is back in the real world. She's playing the piano. Daddy Delos is retiring, all right? He's sick and stuff, and so he's gonna, hand the park over. Although he's an interesting guy. He doesn't care about his legacy. This is a man who's all about the here and now. He does not, he says, William says to him, well, in another 5 or 10 years, this will be good. And he says, well, I haven't got 5 or 10 years. And the fact that this guy is concerned with the now so much is interesting. I wonder if we're going to get a robot of him. All right, this is something that just occurred to me, but this is a man that I think despises death. All right, we don't get a lot of that from him, but you can tell he is trying to pack as much life as he can, as much success as he can into his life. That to him, like what future generations glean is of no importance because he's not going to be there to see it, so why bother? It is a completely narcissistic point of view. And what does a person like that do with the technology of robots that can be almost exactly like humans? If I'm this guy, I say, can we replicate me? Can I be a robot? Can you make me into a robot that can continue running my company with all of my, memories programmed in, with all of my foibles and personality, and none of the drawbacks, right? No stopping points. I'm just saying that's what I would do. I would not be surprised if we see that, but that's wild speculation. Dolores kind of wanders around, gets to talk to Logan, who is way down in the dumps now at this point. He's lost his power in the company, and he is worried about the end of humanity. I don't know why. I don't know if Logan sees if he thinks that there's going to be a sea change in how these hosts work, or if he sees some different threat on the horizon. But something is going on that he is concerned about with these new changes that William and his dad are making to the company, and he's drinking himself into a stupor. I say drinking himself into a stupor, also just drugging it up, and he's clearly lost a grip. And I think, my guess is, again, if we're throwing out this idea that his dad wants to replicate himself, then my guess is he's saying, well, that's just going to end up being everybody. People are just going to choose not to procreate. They'll try to live on in this robot body, and humans essentially will go extinct, because what's like the alternative of the idea of having a perfect recreation of yourself is going to be much more appealing than a child that's going to disappoint you and annoy you and be a big hassle to raise. That's just theorizing stuff, but it seems like a reasonable idea to me. Man in Black tries to get an army put together, headed to glory, but Robert ain't on board with that. And in a sense, the Man in Black is still, he's following a kind of programming in the same way that the robots are following their programming. He's got a goal, he's trying to get there, and Robert cuts him off from having this army that he wants. He says, no. There's a great scene here with Gus Fring from Breaking Bad. Not literally, but, the actor is very, very recognizable. It was cool to see him pop up. I hope that he pops up again. I hope that somebody resurrects him and, he walks around with a bullet hole in his head like the whole show. That'd be amazing. But we get, his men all stand in a circle around the Man in Black, kill themselves. Robert's voice comes out and says, nope, you got to do this one on your own. Although Lawrence can be there, which is cool. And the Man in Black has to figure out a way to get through the Confederados by himself. The final, almost the final scene is a flashback to William and Dolores, all right, together again. He takes her as the rancher's daughter out to see his new creation, right, his addition to Westworld. And we don't know what this thing is, although we did get the giant Bagger 288 digging machine, which I always love in this show. He says back to her those arc words that we saw or heard in the previous, the very first scene, and I think Dolores repeats them again in sort of her piano recital scene, where he says, have you ever seen anything so full of splendor? And his full of splendor is a barren wasteland being torn up by machines and being prepped for his world-dominating plan. So a little bit different than Dolores' outlook, robot Dolores anyway. And we wrap things up with Dolores, having the memory of this, at least this is the implication, having the memory of what Teddy showed her, saying, we're going there and we're getting this thing. This guy showed it to me like an idiot in a past life, and I know what it is. It's not a place, it's a weapon. What that means exactly is fun to speculate on, but honestly, we'll just have to wait and see. Westworld is going in some interesting directions. I personally want to see more Maeve. I need more of that in my life. I think that her character, as I mentioned earlier, is the most relatable character in the show, the one who I can root for the most. Dolores has essentially become the monster that she's fighting. All right, the Man in Black is repeating his loop from the first season, for lack of a better word. And I would not, there's a part of me that would not 100% be surprised if we see the Man in Black as a robot. All right, that he like is revealed as one of these things at some point. I don't know how. All right, I don't know how that would work exactly. Again, if we take the idea that people who fear death create copies of themselves at the point of death and then give those copies consciousness, then maybe that's how that would work. But I'm just saying, if that is a reveal at some point, I would not at all be blown out of my seat. But we'll just have to wait and see. Lots more fun stuff to see in this. I'm really looking forward to getting back to more modern day Abernathy leading around the charge. We get a glimpse of that tiger in the sort of next week on. So I'm hoping that that's something we're going to see here pretty soon. And I hope to see you guys next week with another episode of the Human Echoes Recap. As always, I value your comments. Let me know if I missed things or if you have other theories that I should be taking into account. I read all those and I try to respond as quickly as possible. You guys are awesome, and I will see you next week with another episode of the Westworld Recap. Take care, y'all.